What's up, y'all? Welcome back. Today, in this special birthday edition of my show, we're making cornbread, a food that I usually don't like very much. Gotta be honest, it's never been my favorite, but it's what I was assigned to bring for an upcoming cookout celebration, so I wanted to figure out a version that I would enjoy along with everyone else. I'm pretty happy with what I landed on here, and if you're a fellow cornbread non-enthusiast, maybe you'll like it too. So, let me show you how I do it. First step today is going to be to dice up a couple jalapeños. I went back and forth on if I should do any mix-ins or if I should stick to a more unadulterated form, but it just simply tastes better with peppers and cheese, so I'm going for it. I'm going to gut these since texturally all that stuff is pretty whatever, and I also don't want to make this spicy necessarily, I just want the flavor. I am going to go for a pretty fine dice here because I want them to disperse pretty evenly in the final loaf. Somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch is what I'm aiming for there, and once I have them all chopped up, I'll throw them into my 10-inch cast iron skillet along with 3 tablespoons of butter. This recipe is all calibrated for a 10-inch skillet, so you can scale things up or down if you have one that's a different size. With that going, I'll start working on the wet mix for the cornbread. You'll need 2 bowls, one for the wet stuff and one for the dry stuff. So for the wet mix, I'm doing 2 eggs, 1 cup of buttermilk, 1/2 cup of sour cream, and then I also like to add my salt and sugar to the wets to give them a better chance to dissolve. I'm going with 6 grams of each of those. Worth noting that I'm not making a sweet cornbread here, so the sugar content is pretty low, but a little bit will help accentuate all the other flavors in the same way that salt does. So now onto the dry mix where things get a little more interesting, I think. It starts pretty normally with 150 grams of medium grind cornmeal, but then 75 grams of masa. A lot of recipes are just equal parts flour and cornbread, but the masa helps reinforce the corny backbone and keeps things a little more tender and moist. I do then follow that with 75 grams of all-purpose flour just to bring some structure, 1 teaspoon each of baking soda and baking powder, and then 1 tablespoon of vital wheat gluten. Since there's less flour in here than usual, there's less gluten, and we need the gluten so it doesn't just totally fall apart. So this extra little hit of it won't make it tough later, but it will keep it mostly intact. I'll give that all a quick whisk to combine, and by now the jalapeños should be ready. They don't need a ton of time, I just want to soften them up a bit, so I'll add those along with all of that butter into the wet mix, and then I'll add 1 last tablespoon of butter back into my cast iron pan. This is going to be for lubrication later when I add the batter. Now, in addition to the jalapeños, I also want cheese, so I'm going to add about 3 ounces of sharp cheddar. Normally I wouldn't condone using the pre-shredded stuff because the starches and anti-caking agents make it melt weird, but it's going inside bread today, so it's going to be coated in starch no matter what, so it really doesn't make a difference in this case. So I'll give that a whisk to combine now, and once everything is ready, meaning my oven is preheated and my extra butter is melted, I'll dump the wets into my dries. Baking powder and baking soda as leaveners are time-sensitive things once they get wet, so you want to do this as close to the last second as possible. I'll get that all incorporated now, and it should be a little thicker than a normal cornbread batter at this point. The masa really tightens things up. So now that goes into the cast iron skillet, and I'll take a minute to even it out in there. You don't want to get the top totally smooth because the imperfections will lead to more crust and more browning, but you do want it to cook evenly, so just make sure it fills out the pan. This is going to go into a 425 degree Fahrenheit oven for 20 minutes, and 20 minutes later, this is what we got. A little more blonde than a more traditional cornbread, but that's to be expected, that's fine. I guess the only thing left to do now is to add a couple of these, and there you go. Now it is officially a capital B birthday cornbread. By the way, if you thought putting wax candles into something that just came out of a hot oven was a bad idea, yes. Let's try to get a slice out. The first one is always the hardest, so maybe it's not the cleanest, but whatever, that's fine. This does come out a little more tender and crumbly than most cornbreads, but to me, that's a fair trade-off for it being more moist and having better flavor. And I definitely think this is at its best served piping hot, straight out of the pan. And yeah, this is delicious. Really happy with how it came out. Before this, I had no idea what my ideal cornbread looked like, and I think I've gotten about as close as I'm gonna get. If you want to try a new take on an old classic, I hope you give this recipe a try sometime, and if you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks!